Today's long-awaited guest is Joachim Bitterlich, joining us from the French countryside. Advisor, diplomat, consultant, and general legend on the European stage, he is a professor at the École Supérieure de Commerce de Paris and vice president of the Jacques Delors Institute. Throughout Mr. Bitterlich's diplomatic career, he served as ambassador, permanent representative of Germany on the North Atlantic Council, and ambassador to Spain and Andorra. He is a former advisor to the German Minister of Foreign Affairs, head of the European Policy Department at the Federal Chancellor's Office, and Foreign and Security Policy Advisor to the Chancellor. His current roles include, but are not limited to, Senior Advisor at Berlin Global Advisors and the Austrian Home Ministry, founding member Cogito Praxis, member of the Historical Commission of the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and board member of the École Nationale d'Administration. Mr. Bitterlich studied law, economics, and politics at the University of Saarbrücken and the French National School of Administration in Paris. Mr. Bitterlich has held many positions at Veolia, including Executive Vice President of International Affairs in Paris and Chairman of Veolia Environment Germany. He is today an independent consultant and a member of different public and private boards, including JEDI, the Joint European Disruptive Initiative, whose purpose is to bring Europe to a leadership position in breakthrough technologies. Enjoy the podcast and please subscribe and share. What is the question that you want people to ask you, but they never ask you?
One of the most important questions today, when I look at the situation of, let's say, on the one hand of Europe, and then on my two home countries, Germany and France, is where's Germany going? Where's German defense going? When I look at the situation of the German Social Democratic Party, and I'm not enthusiastic to see this development at all. And because today the Christian Democrats in Germany, with regard to defense and NATO, are in a minority. And the Social Democrats launched this, let's say, marvelous illusion to have an EU army under the auspices of European Parliament. It's nonsense, full stop. And on the other hand, what I'm really worried about, more than ever, is the lack of a real dialogue between main partners. People do not talk really to each other to know what the other is thinking. 2 days ago, in a small working group about our future policy with regard to China. And the first thing I told them, and there were some specialists in, the first question to put is, what is the perception on the one hand of the Chinese? What do they want to do? And what is our European perception with regard to China? And then I have to look at the different areas, and then I have to develop, do I have any margin of maneuver, strategic autonomy? Do I need others? Do I have to look at the US first, etc.? And I was describing the necessary basic questions, and they were looking at me as I were to be an alien, because I think they had in mind all the answers. And I do not have in mind all the answers with regard to China at all, because I have to settle this, let's say, deeply, much more deeply, and then I can take my conclusions. People take conclusions without reflection.
I was reading your piece on the strategic autonomy and the sort of dialogue with the French position and with Emmanuel Macron, and if we don't mind, we would stay with the subject a little bit. I am very skeptical about European capabilities on their own without the complementarity of the transatlantic relations. But
you are absolutely right, but I'm puzzled by one fact, that our research in Europe has become what I call a bureaucratic company or a bureaucratic exercise. And I'm member of an initiative, Franco-German in the beginning, JEDI, Joint European Disruptive Initiative. And our idea was, if we want to reduce our dependence, at least to reduce the dependence on the US and on China, the Europeans will have to follow the receipt of the DARPA. The US created an institution and a special procedure in 1958 to counter the Sputnik. Now we are speaking about Sputnik 5. And it's strange, our Western Sputnik 5, which is BioNTech, German, and Moderna, US, has been developed by, first of all, in Europe, by private money, not by the money of a state, not by supportive movements by the Ministry of Research in Berlin, not at all. 2 billion German billionaires spent 100 million to this young company to support their research. And on the US side, Moderna has been subsidized by the American state, $250 million. DARPA model, this is for me the key. And when we launched this idea, Macron answered, yes, this is the right way. And then we have been blocked in Paris by the ministry. It's interesting, in Berlin by the ministry, and by the whole, let's say, landscape of research in France and in Germany. Because they have become more or less, let's say, civil servants, and they are totally under bureaucratic rules. And what they hate is that someone is taking away from them to some extent, the control of their budgets. And we had been asking to Macron and to Merkel, we would like to get for this 10% of the budget research, with a program manager who is following and with a real risk that this research may be a failure, as the US do it. We need, let's say, another feeling about risk. And in research, you need to some extent risk, or you will always be able to follow others. Please look at the famous mobile phone. 60 patents from US, DARPA based, and 1 European patent. We have to maintain, let's say, this interlinkage between the US on Canada and Europe, yes, but we have to become to some extent independent, able to follow our own path. And to always to measure at any time with the US how to go on. What I would not like to see is a total European dependence in the field of research, and therefore I'm a supporter of this initiative. But up till now, it's a failure for us. And I had a long chat with a late commissioner on research with a Portuguese, with Moedas, and Moedas said to me at the end, Joachim, you are right with what you want to reach, but I'm not able to reach it here in Brussels. It's against, let's say, the united forces of research of the main member states and of the European Parliament. One of these fascinating issues that it's so strange when you look at the vaccinations now in Europe, the failure of what I call the established forces, Pasteur, Sanofi, Merck, you don't hear anything from them. And suddenly there were 2 or 3 biotechs, young biotechs, who have been succeeding. And these young biotechs have been, let's say, promoted by private capital, not by, let's say, the classical European bureaucratic methods. But for me, it's an example. We could be much better than we are. Therefore, the Americans are much more flexible, and they are not risk averse as the Europeans. In Europe, if you get, let's say, the first failure, well, stop, finished. For an American, a first failure is nothing. You may try it again.
If you don't mind me staying still with your paper on the strategic autonomy, you also touched the issue of the internal German politics and what might come after the fall elections. Would you be willing to elaborate a little bit on that?
I think it's early. It's a typical German electorate year, with many elections at the regional level as finally at the federal level. Yes, it's typical. I remember I've been running or coordinating 2 German presidencies in election years. And the Chancellor told me only, please do the job, do it as best, avoid conflicts. I want to have, let's say, peace on that side, on the European side. Okay, but it's again typical. But let's say but this is Europe. We have always elections somewhere, and in Germany, it's an election which is, let's say, for me, under new, to some extent, under new auspices. On the one hand, it's, let's say, typical German. After a certain number of years, let's say, the number one is leaving. This had been with regard to Helmut Kohl, then Gerhard Schröder, now it's Angela Merkel leaving. And people tell me, well, we don't have magnificent candidates, number one candidates. I said, yes, dear friends, but please remember 1982, when Kohl came into power. He was totally underestimated by all the journalists and by the media, thinking he was someone coming in, jumping in, let's say, from a deep German province. The same applied in 1998 with Gerhard Schröder. Gerhard Schröder was Prime Minister of Lower Saxony. It's kind. Well, he was member of the advisory board of Volkswagen, perhaps even more important than his political job. But please, he was, let's say, he had not any experience at the federal level. Okay, this is, let's call it typical German. And for me, in my eyes, you will see probably at the end of a year, after, let's say, 100 days of harsh and difficult negotiations, you will see either what the Germans like the colors. It's either a black-green coalition or a black-green-yellow coalition. Even if the blacks and the greens do not like very much the yellows, as the yellows have been, let's say, those who have been, let's say, avoiding any responsibility some years ago in the last elections. This is, for me, the most suitable result. My deception today is the Social Democratic Party in Germany. It's a Social Democratic Party, much more than the Christian Democrats, because Merkel has never been a party leader, never. Merkel has never been looking after the party. And some events in the party, especially the relationship towards, let's say, the extreme right, the AfD, the case of Thüringen, has been, let's say, a surprise because Merkel has never been there. And the first visitor to look after this problem, to talk to people, has been AKK, as the Germans say. The first one. And for me, what's the preoccupation is the status of the Social Democratic Party. I have a solid candidate for me, Olaf Scholz, really solid, who could be a chancellor without any problem. He has the necessary experience, but his party is somewhere else with two co-chairmen, which are really, let's say, somewhere in the left. And this same applies, let's say, to at least 1/3 of his own party. When you look at the management of the party in parliament, when you look at the management in the Länder, let's say 30–40% are somewhere else. And this going down to, let's say, to an average between 10 and 15% in elections, for me, it's a shock. It's a shocking experience. The other side, which is, let's say, not the beloved one at all, is the extreme right, is the AfD case. And I think they have been underestimated for, let's say, long time, for too long time, thinking this is, let's say, a periodical phenomenon as we have had in the past. Remember, we had this in the 60s in Germany, even till the 70s. And with an electorate, and this is even more interesting, which is switching from left to right or from right to left. We had this case, we had made analysis in my active time, where we saw clearly, let's say, that the worker in the shipyards in Hamburg or in Bremen, who voted before the Communist Party or the left wing of the Social Democratic Party, was suddenly making a switch to, let's say, the extreme right. For me, I think both the Social Democratic Party and the Christian Democrats have been underestimating this phenomenon. And they should have, let's say, be much more, let's say, outspoken with regard, let's say, to a certain number of problems. Take the example, internal security, police, take the aspect of migration. Yes. Let's say remain an open country, but, you know, the harshest punishment of any politician is if the voter has the feeling something is out of control. You look at the pandemic situation in Germany today. People have lost confidence because they think those are no more controlling the situation. And this is, for me, a key experience in politics. And what I've learned from Genscher and from Kohl, from these old chaps, is, let's say, please look at any moment you have to control the situation. Otherwise, you are lost. And it's over because people lose confidence in you. And then we will look for alternatives, and even for silly alternatives. And therefore, let's say this is, for me, the preoccupation, but the Social Democratic Party is not only a preoccupation in Germany, it's a preoccupation elsewhere. And to some extent, our classical parties will have to redefine themselves in the future.
Staying still with the subject of the paper, you are exploring the divisions between France and Germany with regard to various policy issues of the EU. Do you feel that these rifts are different from what the EU has been experiencing in the past?
Well, it's to some extent usual. And what's lacking between the two countries are those who are translating. We do not have any or interpreters or translators or those who are decoding the other. And I think the key has become that, let's say, Macron is to some extent too arrogant to listen, first of all, what would be the reflex in Berlin if I say ABC? No. And in Berlin, the same situation applies. Merkel is not willing, let's say, to test something, first of all, what she would do, how it sounds in Paris, or it sounds elsewhere. We have lost this, let's say, this sounding basis. And this is, for me, it's to some extent a tragedy. And everyone is talking, let's say, on his own basis, not reflecting what the other would think about it. And therefore, we have only a few examples in the last years where, at the end of the day, they have been succeeding, let's say, in overcoming these differences. Example is the famous EU plan to overcome COVID. But again, there could have got it, let's say, in an easier way, in my eyes. But they wanted to be, and this is Macron's work, to get it a bit more complicated. Today, we have the problem that the case is in Karlsruhe. And there is some, let's say, super instance in Germany, it's the Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe. And they are waiting for a moment to stop the government somewhere. I do not think they will stop the government really this time, but they are waiting for it. And this is, let's say, the lack of clarity of people in Berlin. And they should have been, let's say, clearer to some extent. But again, politics is compromise. And Europe has always been a compromise, never a perfect one, never a, let's say, a last compromise, at the end of the day, but in initial thinking. And therefore, I would have done it in another way at that time. But I supported publicly the Franco-German initiative in this field in order to get really something common on the table. We needed this. What's sad is the fact that they needed 6 months to put the basics of execution on the table with European Parliament. 6 months is a bit long for this.
You're about to publish your memoirs. When you were writing them, were you ever looking at yourself in the past and like screaming at yourself thinking, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you think about that?
No, Odessa, there is one area where I'm in disagreement what we have been doing. It's the expansion of the European Union towards the East, including let's say, NATO expansion. The way we have done it, I'm in disagreement till today, and I see it today through, let's say, the eyes or through the Balkans. What to do with the Balkans? What to do with, let's say, this rift, this growing rift between East and West. And I think, for me, it was right to launch the expansion to the East, yes, without any reluctance from my side. Then let's say, we put up some obstacles. It's the famous 1993 summit of Copenhagen. More obstacles than an invitation at that time. And then we were beginning slowly, because at that time, the mood in Western Europe was not in favor of expansion to the East at all. There was the pressure from the East. We want to join the club. And on the Western side, we had the Germans. Full stop. No one else wanted to have really the expansion to the East rapidly. The French were trying to stop it, did not succeed, or were not, let's say, able to stop it. And we did then, let's say, screening, we did so many things. But what we have been failing is the political integration of these countries. What I call the political. This means support to political parties, support to, let's say, building political parties, political society. And I have always in mind a short story. I think it was 95, Kohl delivered a state visit to Poland. And as they do it within state visits, Kohl had to receive all the party leaders represented in the same. And at the end of the meetings, Kohl asked me, who was in your eyes the best? And I said it was Alexander Kwasniewski. No one else. The whole West forget about. Our Christian Democratic partner on the right had an excellent man, former finance minister Balcerowicz. Excellent, but a technocrat. Not someone who was, let's say, understanding what people think or what people would like to see, or how to overcome reluctance or reserves of people. No. He had executed a marvelous step in the beginning of the Polish reforms, yes, but that's all. And Kohl said to me, well, as Kwasniewski is a socialist, please tell it to the leader of the Social Democratic Party in Germany, Scharping, whom I informed regularly about, let's say, critical cases where the leader of the opposition had to be informed. And Scharping said to me, oh, excellent idea. I will ask the Friedrich Ebert Foundation to look after Poland more than after others. Same story applied to the Christian Democrats. Kohl did it. But did we do enough? I take only the example of Poland. I could, I think, apply the same story to all other countries in Central and Eastern Europe. There's been only a small group who has been better than others. These are the Baltic countries. But the rest, I think we have missed to some extent, our job. And I'm a bit impressed by what a friend from the East told me some weeks ago. And he had to come from the two, let's say, from the two bad guys. He said to me, well, our hope was to be integrated step by step in what you have been doing for the last 50 years. What you have been doing was never a perfect agreement. This was always a compromise with differences among you, or remaining differences even. But we didn't want to be re-educated. You know, and if you hear this word re-educated, you think immediately at, say, at the end of World War II, where the West Germans had to be re-educated after Nazism, where the East Germans have been re-educated by the Communist Party, etc. And this is for me, well, this is working with me. And it was difficult for me to answer. To answer to him and to tell him you are not right. But he is right to some extent. What we are doing now with the Eastern countries is, let's say, is in my way, it's not the way of patience, not the way of, let's say, adopting them step by step with their history, with their past, with their failures, as we have done those similar failures in the 60s, 70s. Please look at, let's say, the denazification. Germany, we needed in reality till the middle of the 60s, 20 years after World War II. Austria has never done any denazification. The French are still looking for the right way how to deal with the period of the occupation, 1940 to 1944. They have not found, let's say, the right way. What can I tell to a Polish man who sacked 3 of their best ambassadors, telling them you have been in the Communist Party and you have been signing an engagement for the Secret Service in order to be able to study abroad? I know all the 3, they're friends, and I know exactly they have never been, never harming any person or never denouncing anyone, never. They wanted to study abroad. One was going to Sweden, the other one was going, I think, to the UK, and the third was going to Italy. Okay, but on the other hand, we have done certain mistakes there. And my answer to some Polish near government people was, you are wrong to sack these people. And his answer was, well, it's our job, it's not your job. It's, let's say, these people are pride too. And I think we should have done much more, let's say, to help, to build, to construct, to some extent, political society in these countries. And look at our helpless answer to the Balkans till today. I know it's impossible to integrate them in a fast track. It's clear. They have to find their way, they have to develop their way, but they need an answer. Last year, I was participating in a hearing in the French Senate, and after my intervention, the young leader of the European Commission in the Albanian parliament came to see me and said, well, thank you for your open words, but please help us. We need a plan. We need a development plan. Otherwise, we will remain, the elder people will remain alone in Albania. All the youngsters will leave for Austria, for Germany, or for Italy. Therefore, I think we have to learn from these cases. And I don't think we have learned enough.
To another topic that, if I'm not mistaken, is very, very dear to you, and that is Turkey. With our institute, which, our analysis at this point are based on big data sort of processing, and we were in more of a testing way. We were assigned a question what our data, global data, tell us about Turkey and its relations to NATO, EU, and to the West. While our data suggested very clear picture of Turkey drifting away on structural conditions, away from the West, away from the European Union, both socially, economically, and also finding itself in a very vulnerable position at this point as it pivots towards the East and Southeast in terms of its economic and investment relations. So what is your take on this issue?
Well, I needed some time, let's say, to form my view at the end of the day. And I was astonished in 2003 by the green light of the European Council to open the accession negotiations with Turkey. On the other hand, well, you had to understand the pressure from the other side. We have been promising, let's say, the entry of Turkey since the 60s, 50 years ago, or 40 years ago at that time. Yes, but when I look at the situation as it is, and I've written this in 2007, that we should stop the enlargement negotiations and tell to the Turkish side, let's say, a little truth. We are not able to conclude these negotiations because of a situation in, let's say, number of parliaments in Western Europe, including in France. France would need a referendum to get the Turkish accession through. And I think the result would be negative, as the people would not think, let's say, about Turkey, but about Algeria. It's Muslim. It's the Muslim question. I regret. And therefore, my answer was, please stop this whole exercise and let's integrate Turkey into the internal market as an economic integration. And let's develop an association with regard to the other areas. And in 15 years, we will look again at the question. And my Turkish friends, because I'm a Franco-Turkish association I'm in, my Turkish friends told me, you are right, it would be better for us. But Europe should propose this, not we. And still, since that time, it's a deadlock. And what I see in Turkey, and I'm regularly visiting Turkey with this association. We have our annual meetings always in Turkey. And I've been observing Erdogan. Erdogan in the beginning, let's say, mayor of Istanbul, more or less on a pro-European line or pro-Western line. And with the departure of the US and with the weakness of Russia, let's say between 2000 and 2010, let's take this, or 2015, Turkey has got, let's say, this idea, it's our comeback as a power of the Middle East, as a real power of the Middle East. It's the competition between Iran, Turkey, and Egypt normally, but Egypt is totally out of the race for the moment. And the third one is not even Saudi Arabia, but it's a tandem, Saudi Arabia and Israel working there. And Turkey was thinking, we are back. And they were trying, let's say, to impose their model, their way of thinking, what I call Muslim Brotherhood and others, to Egypt, to others. They failed totally in this. And I think the Europeans should have taken this situation, tell to Turkey, it's not a problem of weakness, but please come with us. We will be associated strongly. In the you will become member, a real member of the internal market. This was my model. And we will see afterwards. I think it should have been 10 times better. You are right when I look at the real development of Turkey. And this is particular to the AKP and to Erdogan. They are drifting away more and more. And you are right, it's becoming structural. My last visit to Istanbul, 2 years ago, you know, when you walk through the streets just alone, it was for me 10, 15 years ago, a modern city, a modern, let's say, world city. It's one of the cities I like most, Istanbul. It was, well, women in a normal Western way, the big majority. Today it's over. The majority is now with a scarf. The mood has changed, and when I saw even a Turkish friend, his son has been arrested in the first, let's say, manifestations about this park in downtown Istanbul. And even the father was under pressure suddenly. You know, Turkey is not, let's say, the shocking point. Turkey has been this particular model, what I call the Atatürk model, neutrality of a state to some extent. The state executed the censorship of the Islam during years and years. The Mufti was not allowed to tell what he wanted. He was controlled in a certain, let's say, neutral way. For me, okay, to some extent. Even a model perhaps for some Western countries, France or Germany, for their Muslim minorities. But suddenly this was, let's say, over. And military people told me, as some liberal politicians told me, please, the pressure on us is raising. We do not have any more this freedom we had, let's say, years ago. It's true, before Erdogan, politics were to some extent corrupt in Turkey.
So, you know, I'm wondering what would happen if your model, you know, Turkey being the member of the internal market, how it worked.
What we need at the same time, it's not only the economic side, what we need is another political dialogue with Turkey. When you look, for example, look at the Syrian case. You have one subject in Turkey where Turkish people do not react, let's say, in our European way. It's Kurdistan, the Kurdish question. And it's ultra sensitive in Turkey. I think, did we help them? Yeah, they were left alone. But on the other hand, we should have, let's say, explained to them where are limits on our side too, where we can help them and where not. For example, we could have explained to them, please, in Western Europe, regionalization is the right answer, if you want, and not separation. Separatism is not the right. There has been other examples, okay, but this is our general tendency. And I think, but we should have done more with them instead of, let's say, leaving them alone. What you need with Turkey is, to some extent, to consider them, to show to Turkey that we are taking them seriously, and at the same time explaining to them our limits. Actually, in France, you have a let's say, exciting case. You have heard about Milli Görüş. It's the youth movement, let's say, more or less Muslim Brotherhood, if you want. In Germany, under strong observation by the interior authorities. And in France, they have concluded agreements to construct schools, private schools in France. And they refuse to sign anything on, let's say, the principles of the French Republic, especially laïcité, more of a neutral position of the French state with regard to religious questions. And the French have enormous difficulties how to do it. I'm critical on Milli Görüş, as I've been critical on, let's say, the Saudis who have been defending, let's say, extremist religious positions. But did the Catholics have been better in Western Europe in the past? I have doubts. Therefore, I think what's lacking to me when I I'm in a closed room and I talk with Turkish even politicians or leading people from the economy, well, I can talk about these subjects. And what's missing for me, it's an open dialogue about critical questions.
Do you think this was different, 30 years, 35 years ago? Did politics change in some substantive way? Is there less trust?
Less trust is right. Less trust is one of these areas. Trust, confidence in the other side. And yes, trust, confidence, it's less. And we were under pressure about Turkey, Germany, in the whole Kohl period, especially when Kohl's son, let's say, was married to a Turkish girl. And they wanted always to get from Kohl his promise to integrate Turkey in the European Union. And Kohl never gave it, never. Because he said always, I'm not feeling sure, let's develop an association. Yes, internal market, he was open but not decided. But let's develop the association to see whether it works at the end of the day. Because Turkey is another society than ours, with another history, with another past. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we need a real dialogue with Turkey.
If you were to look into the future, into the next 15 to 20 years, where do you see a realistic breaking point that will be a massive disruption, whether positive or negative, in Europe?
In 15, 20 years, I followed a title of analysis that Andrew Moravchik has been writing last year. No, it's last year. Why Europe wins at the end. The Europeans need more time. They are much slower. The Europeans have to learn, let's say, lessons learned from the last years. Lessons to be learned not only with regard to the pandemic question, but with regard to the future of the economy, future of defense, future of foreign policy. The biggest deception for me is foreign policy of the Europeans. And they have to learn. And my first advice to the Europeans would be, please concentrate on essentials. And for me, the first essential is the survival in the longer run of our economic and social European continental model, not British. The continental model is the self-assertion of the European economy, of the European economic and social model. For me, it's a key question. This integrates what we discussed in the beginning, research. This integrates, let's say, long-term economic thinking, long-term investments, how to deal with debt, etc. It's stamped, it's the economy first. And the second subject, you need to develop absolutely in Europe, if you want to win back the confidence of people, is internal security. It's police, migration, control of European external borders, cooperation among the Europeans. It's for me, it's a key, underestimated key question. The third area is Europe has to really develop foreign and security policy. And this applies first to foreign policy. And please, foreign policy will never be integrated, let's say, within the European Commission as, let's say, the market has been done. No, you have to find another model there. And security has to, external security is the other side. Our American friends tell us for the last, let's say, 20 years, please do more for your defense. Do more to, let's say, to intervene. But our answer to the Americans has to be, yes, we have to do this. Second, this means at the same time that we will, on certain interventions, we will not depend on you. We will have to do it in our neighborhood on our own. We will keep you informed, consult you, it's normal, in a discreet way. Certain things we will have to do together, others we will have to do on our own, and therefore we need what I call this European pillar within NATO and within the European institutions. This will not be done by all, let's say, the 27, perhaps by less, by those who are willing to do it. And we will have even therefore develop another culture among Europeans.
Thank you for listening. Next week, we'll hear from Banning Garrett from Washington, D.C., who is the founding director of the Atlantic Council's Strategic Foresight Initiative, and we'll be chatting about China, Russia, climate change, and future strategic scenarios. Until then, have a great day.